Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the third Resource Allocation Management and Planning, or RAMP, Open Forum. The last forum at WKU was in May, when there was a panel of representatives from three universities, NKU, University of North Dakota, and Indiana University, who had also gone through adopting and were using the RAMP model. And they were here to answer questions and to share their experiences with you. And today, our goal is to give everyone an update on our RAMP efforts, to talk about how we plan to move forward, and to answer your questions. But before we do that, I wanted to take a moment to emphasize the importance of this initiative. WKU's RAMP efforts started in January, and while I was not here at that time, in his announcement of the RAMP initiative, President Caboni noted that our current approach to budgeting was constructed in a different era and that it is no longer sustainable. In charging a committee to work on the RAMP initiative, President Caboni called for a different approach and asked the committee to design a resource allocation model that incentivizes and rewards performance. The committee set out to do just that, but not by adopting another institution's model, but rather by designing a model that reflects WKU's unique strengths, culture, and values. We have tremendous opportunity here at WKU. This is a wonderful place, but unfortunately, we've been hampered by a period of declining enrollments and thus declining tuition, and as a result, budget cuts. So we need to move past that. We need a more sustainable resource model, and we need to return to a cycle of growth. As we often talk about how we want to grow as a student-centered applied research institution with impact on the region and beyond, per our new strategic plan, we're in the process of comprehensive academic program evaluation so that we are sure to offer an appropriate mix of academic programs and that we strategically allocate resources to those programs. That is what our new resource allocation model will help us do. With regard to resource allocation, we need alignment, collaboration, and communication. Having met since January, the RAMP Steering Committee has designed a model that promotes recruitment, instruction, and research, and just as importantly, the model promotes a different type of decision-making. A significant component of all this is implementing appropriate processes and governance structures, which we will talk more about later today. And the model provides distributed units with data, and it creates a better forum for discussions and decisions. Another important feature is transparency. With respect to transparency, President Caboni and I are making a new commitment to budgetary transparency. And you can see all of that on the RAMP website. If you've not already done so, I encourage you to visit the RAMP website by Googling WKU and RAMP. And it has presentations from steering committee meetings, timelines, FAQs, and perhaps of most interest, 3 years of detailed financial models. And if you look at the models, you'll see that there are no easy answers, but you'll also see how each of our units contribute to the university as a whole, and you will see how our colleges and universities and schools are supporting one another. You will also see how the model will help ensure we are appropriately supporting our academic mission and research enterprises, and that we are being very wise about our investments and strategic priorities. And with that intro, I'll stop and I'll turn this over to Andrew Laws. For those of you who have not yet met Andrew, he's the managing editor at Huron Consulting Group. He's helped over 50 institutions with budget redesign initiatives, and he's been working with our RAMP Steering Committee since January.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Terry. I think I've got this lapel mic, so I don't need this one. And I'm not hung up at all on titles, but I will say I'm not an editor. My wife corrects my grammar in English all the time, so I'm managing director. Anyway, thank you all for coming today. See lots of familiar faces, and I appreciate you coming to hear the update. Terry kind of walked through the agenda already. Really, we want to provide a project update. We want to talk about how we see the model as a catalyst for success, and we want to talk about the governance and the process that will come along with the new model. Perhaps more importantly, we want to provide some time to answer questions that any of you may have. And so while I think we have about 75 minutes here today, we're going to try and get through the 10, 12 slides pretty quickly so that we have plenty of time for Q&A. So this, for those of you that have attended other forums, have seen this slide before. We just keep moving the dotted line across. We are now coming to the conclusion of the infrastructure development phase of the process. Of course, this follows the 11-month process where we've been doing stakeholder engagement, visioning, financial modeling, et cetera. Some of the efforts that are some of the notable activities that have taken place since the May Open Forum. We had a capstone retreat with all the deans and steering committee members where we brought everyone together for a day and talked about here's where we started, here's the straw man model that the committee put together, here's the feedback that we've received from all the colleges and schools, and here's a proposed model, and we kind of iterated through those changes. We had 4 additional steering committee meetings. We met with the president's cabinet. We met with the Board of Regents. We spent some time with the faculty senate. We went around and conducted a number of visits and discussions and orientations with the auxiliary unit leaders and with a number of the administrative unit leaders. We had a second round of department chair meetings where we went to every college and school and held kind of a localized forum where we met with department chairs and answered their questions. And there's been about 6 or 7 folks at the university, either through the provost office or through the finance and budget office, that we have been working with to train and get comfortable using the model so that we can really hand it over and WKU can own this process going forward. So really those are many of the notable steps in the last few months. Tangibly, we have moved from the straw man model that the steering committee came up with to the model that all the deans agreed upon and endorsed at our capstone meeting, to multiple years of models. And so now we've got a fiscal 17 actuals model, a fiscal 18 actuals model, and a fiscal 19 budget model, all that portray the university under the new ramp model. As Terry mentioned, these are the pieces that are shown on the website, the ramp website. If you go to the website and look at the subheader, you can click and see this. From my perspective, this is really a strong indication of the university's commitment to transparency, right? You can go and see the tuition revenues and costs by college, by school. You can see what we're spending on IT, HR, facilities, et cetera. And so this is really, in many ways, a new level of transparency. While historically you could go get the budget book, now most of the data that you'd be interested in is on a 1-sheet piece of paper. As we think about moving forward, of course, we didn't do this so we have a one-page Excel file that shows all the numbers. We do this, as the provost said, so we can make better decisions and we can better support our strategic plan, and we can better engage distributed stakeholders in that process. And so what we've listed here are some of the key benefits that we anticipate accruing, the key things that we see stakeholders doing, and things that we've seen other universities be able to accomplish in a more effective way with models like this. And so the first one I'll note is new academic programs. And so we want this model to facilitate growth. We want this model to help us figure out how we can have more market relevant programs, how we can grow our enrollments, and how we can increase retention. And so in one way, this model will help that because we see the funds flows associated with those new programs. And when we launch new programs, resources will flow to our units to support those programs. Similarly, we think this model will help with academic portfolio management. This is really a question of trade-off discussions. And so we don't want the model to, I'm sorry, there's a little bit of feedback here. I don't know if I'm too close to this, but we don't want the model to suggest in any way that academic programs should all break even or be profitable, or that colleges should break even or be profitable. What we want to do, though, is from an academic portfolio perspective, be able to understand which of our programs are profitable, which of our programs are high cost but mission critical, so we want to keep doing them, and how do we balance that? How do we get the right balance from that at a university level when we think about each of the colleges compared to the others? And how do we balance that at a college level when we're thinking about programs or departments or offerings? Research collaboration, we want to use the model to better inform what research we want to do, how we want to do that research, how we want to conduct and support that research. And as the provost said, the model the committee came up with has some pretty strong incentives for research. Space is often considered the final frontier. We see these models facilitate better utilization of space. We want to make sure that we're appropriately trading space, and that people that need space have it. The people that have excess space have incentives to share it. And so there's some components in the model that do that. And then finally, administrative service delivery. We want to ensure that the model is helping us match administrative service levels with administrative funding levels. And we want to be able to understand from a distributed stakeholder perspective, what are the service levels that we would like to have? What are the service levels we're willing to pay for? How do we facilitate those conversations, and what are those trade-offs? And so, again, we call this the catalyst, but the model should better inform all of these conversations and help move us to a position where we can do all 5 of these things better. With respect to governance, every time I go that way, it buzzes. With respect to governance, we're not changing anything about the ultimate budgetary authority of the university or the Board of Regents. That still lies with the president and the board. What we're doing is we are using the model to, again, create the better forum for discussion, and we're adding 2 committees. And so I realize this is small, this will be on the RAMP website, but really the 2 new committees are the third box down. It's called the Executive Budget Committee. And then just under that to the left, the Auxiliary Support Unit Allocation Committee. So in the new model, essentially I don't know if there's a color, okay, yeah. So the admin and support units will make budget requests up through the Auxiliary Support Unit Committee, and it'll go to the Executive Budget Committee. The academic units will make requests up through the provost to the Executive Budget Committee, and then ultimately that goes up to the president and the board. I'll talk about it a little bit more here. So from the administrative side, under the new model, I think as everybody knows, revenues are allocated out to the colleges and schools. The cost of the university administrative services are also then allocated out to the colleges and schools. And so what we want to do is make sure that there's not a disconnect there. We want to make sure that the units that are now covering those costs have an appropriate level of interaction, engagement, discussion with those units. And so you see here the primary makeup of this committee is the group of deans. There's also faculty reps and finance reps here. But what this committee would do is to primarily engage with those administrative and service units, talk about what was their budget last year, what is the budget that they need next year, what are the changes, how would we anticipate service levels changing with those changes, and then we would facilitate that conversation across a number of administrative areas. And this committee would give advice to the Executive Budget Committee about those requests and whether or not they support or endorse those requests. Okay. If I go back, so then the Executive Budget Committee, this is meant to be more of a broader based committee. You can see it has similar academic and faculty reps, but there are other reps as well. The provost office, I think there's a student rep, staff council rep, et cetera. And so this committee will take the proposals from the provost office for all the academic units, take the proposals from the allocation committee for the administrative and service units, and we'll think about how do we balance that as a university, and are we appropriately allocating resources towards our strategic plan? Are we making the right, does that collection of budget requests reflect our strategic plan, reflect our culture, reflect our values, reflect what we want to do in the coming year. And then that would be the proposal that then flows up to the president, the cabinet, et cetera, and flows through the regions. I talked about space as being an important part of this, so we've also heard from the steering committee that we think it's important to have or that they think it's important to have a space planning committee. Really, the space committee would do two primary things. And so, one, they would help set space policy and help determine service levels for space in terms of, right now the model suggests that a square foot costs $28 at Western Kentucky. So academic units would be charged $28 per square foot. They would help set that rate, right? Do we need to reduce service levels and charge $27? Do we need to increase service levels and charge $29? Those are that's the first type of decision this committee would make. The second type of decision this committee would make is they would be the broker of space. And so where we want to see trading of space, or we want to think about what is the appropriate centralization of classroom space, or how are we thinking about sharing technology-equipped classrooms, things of that nature. This committee would facilitate that brokerage, and they would set the kind of rules of the road for those kind of discussions. Okay? Now, as we see at other institutions, more mature institutions, you could get into things in this committee like research throughput and research labs and things of that nature. But what we've pointed out to the committee is this needs to be kind of a crawl, walk, run type of model. And there are several components of that. And it's simply going to take 2, 3, 4 years before we get to that level of complexity. But so starting out, we think about this committee as service levels and space brokerage. From a process perspective, the committee's outlined 5 primary steps. And so the first step is really facilitated in the future, will be facilitated in kind of the October to November timeline. And this is really going to be done primarily by a number of, we're calling them operational support teams. So it's institutional research, enrollment management, all of those kind of units that help put together the planning assumptions for the budget. So what do we think appropriations are going to be? What do we anticipate changes in tuition to be? What do we think is going to happen to enrollment, et cetera, et cetera? We would pull together all those planning assumptions, and at the output of this A in November, those planning assumptions would go to all the administrative and service units. Those administrative and service units would use that data in the December, January timeframe to develop their budget proposals for the next year. As part of that, they would take their budget proposals to the allocation, the unit allocation committee, and they would facilitate those discussions. Again, what the budget was last year, what they'd like it to be next year, what the changes are anticipated. The output of that step, letter B, is essentially an amended set of planning assumptions, where then you can send to the deans and the academic units not only the initial planning assumptions like tuition and appropriations and salary adjustments, et cetera, but also the anticipated cost of all the administrative and service units that they're going to be asked to pay. So in step C, the deans would use that data, use their historical numbers, use their tools that we'll provide as part of this process. They would develop budget proposals for their college. They would take that to the provost. They would have discussions about that. Ultimately, that would flow up through the executive budget committee. And in D, the executive budget committee would make proposals to the president and then ultimately to the board of regents. Decisions would be set. We would make sure that the budget proposals all balance, that we're in check. And then ultimately E is the within year management of the budget, right? So this is us thinking about how do we grow revenues within the year, how do we control expenses, how do we make mid-course corrections and those things. And so this is generally speaking the 5 steps. Of course, we've got process maps and Visios that document 150 steps within these 5, but for purposes of this forum, I think it's reasonable to think about it as these 5 high-level components. So as we think about kind of in summary and the ultimate changes that we're going to see, again, we think the model will have an impact on academic planning and how you're thinking about trade-off discussions and how, you know, I like to tell people at the end of the day, there's going to be a large group of faculty members that don't see any change with this budget model. They never know that anything changed. They're going to go to their classes, they're going to do their research, there's going to be no impact. There's another group of faculty members who in many ways drive our innovation on campus, and they come up with new program ideas, new course ideas, new research ideas. And too many times in an incremental model where activity levels are not funded, they ask for resources and they get told no, 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 no. What we want to happen in this new model is you can make proposals, and when you can get investment dollars, and when activities happen, when credit hours or research dollars flow, resources come back to your unit. And so that's what we want to see in the academic planning, is that type of trade-off discussion and that type of balancing between our profitable programs and our high-cost programs. Tools and templates are going to be new, and so we've got some tools where you can put in, you know, maybe it's pedagogically best if I have 20 students in a classroom, but you know, what happens if I have 22 students in a classroom? Will that give me enough revenue to then hire a TA or a graduate assistant or to go to the conference I wanted to go to? And so we've got a planning tool where you can put in, you know, incremental credit hours or an incremental research proposal or whatnot, and you can see how much revenue would flow back to a unit, how much cost would come with that revenue, and so what the direct margin of that would be. We're going to provide tools to the deans and the business managers that show multiple years of their budget under this model so that they can forecast you know, tuition, fees, research dollars, sales and services, DLO dollars, et cetera, and so try and take some of that volatility out. Of course, I just went through the process, so that some of those cycle times are going to change. Most notably, the administrative and service units are going to be asked to budget a little bit earlier in the calendar year. And then ultimately, we feel like, as the provost mentioned, overall, this is going to move us to a more data-centered budget discussion. And so we're going to have more data to leverage in that conversation and more data to inform the strategic investments we're making. The last slide I wanted to show up here is just a final plug for the RAMP website. Here's where you can click this kind of subheader where you can see the different presentations, the FAQs, and then you can click to download the various models. But as the provost mentioned, it's got timelines, FAQs, et cetera, et cetera. So I was asked to go about 20 minutes. I think that's about right. We're 25 minutes in right now. We've got until 15 after the hour, so we've got 50 minutes. I'd be happy to. Actually, let me ask Ann and Terry to come up, and the three of us together will try and answer any questions that you have. Has anybody, can I see a show of hands who's been to the website? That's pretty good. Who's downloaded the model? Was the model as understandable as I proposed that it is? Okay. See some heads nodding, not as many hands, but heads nodding. Yeah.
Hi there. I'm Shane, International Program. This is something that I might have covered in a more focused group with the support unit, but it's clarification for the handful of units that both report to the program and our support unit. And I was curious about where our flow of your budget proposals would go. Would they run through the provost, as I believe we had originally discussed, or based on the kind of map that you put up there, it was going to the executive budget committee through some other means?
So unless it's a college or a school, so unless it's the real academic units, everything's going to flow through the support unit allocation committee. So what we would anticipate is for any unit that reports to the provost, they would work with the provost to develop their budget, and then they would take that developed budget to the support unit allocation committee to discuss that budget with them, right? So it won't be that you're cutting the provost out of the loop and you just go straight to the support unit committee. You would work with the provost, develop the budget, and then in reality, what's likely going to happen is the provost is going to take one budget to the support unit allocation committee as opposed to all the units within the provost office taking it. In general, there's going to be, I think, 11 units that make proposals to the support unit allocation committee. So international programs, for example, would roll up under the provost budget that she takes to that committee. So that's something the committee had to spend a fair amount of time talking about. So for example, Ohio University has about 45, actually it's 42 units that go to the support unit allocation committee. University of Michigan has 4. We landed on 11. And so we didn't want to have death by committee, but we wanted to have appropriate transparency and engagement there. Yes, sir.
My name is Harold Little. I'm the chair of the accounting department. One of the big concerns that I have right now is how market salaries will be included in the budgeting process, especially since our salaries in the accounting group and the accounting career areas are relatively high compared to other areas.
So I can talk about it from a modeling perspective and then see if the provost has anything to add, but, or Ann. So we want to continue to have institutional equity in our salaries. And so cost of living adjustments, market adjustments, merit adjustments, et cetera, those policies will continue to be controlled centrally. And that part of the planning assumptions that go out to the units will be, we think you should plan for a 3% increase or a 2.5% increase, something like that. What we don't want the model to do is to create a set of haves and have-nots where if, arts and sciences is usually very profitable programs and engineering is high cost. We don't want arts to be able to pay people whatever they want and engineering not to be able to make market salaries, right? So we want to continue to have cross subsidies across units, and we want to continue to have salary equity where we set those numbers centrally.
Well, and colleges and business need to be competitive, and part of that is offering salaries that are competitive. So, but again, that's something within the college that can be worked out with incentivized modeling too, keeping that in mind. You're accredited, you need to keep your accreditation. That's part of that too, is to have faculty that are making valuable contributions and that are appropriately compensated.
And of course, just salary compression and market pressures in general, the reasons why we need to try and turn enrollment around and have more market relevant programs and grow our resource pool so we can give people the fair compensation they deserve for all their contributions.
Paula Kirby, I'm the faculty. I have a little, I'm trying to read through with the space issue, and I'm really curious how the space for classrooms work. Because are they designated to a particular college? And then, some departments like don't have space, which means that they would have to pay for space in order to where other colleges have a lot of space to offer. So how does that work? How's it balance out? It seems like people don't actually have to do it because they don't have a lot of space.
Yeah.
But
So space data is not perfect when you move into these models, right? So it's going to take us a little bit of time to get the space data as accurate as we'd like it to be. But what our goal is and what the committee has landed on is if you have first right of refusal for the space, then you own it and you pay for it. If you don't have first right of refusal, then you get a free ride. And so what we want to do is we want to incentivize every college and school to decide how much they're willing to pay for and how much they want a free ride. And so the example is if I'm in business and I've got my famed professor that knows everything about everything and wants to teach a 100-hour course or a 100-student course All right, engineering. Anyway, so we say we need a class that will seat 100 students and it needs to have smart technology, et cetera, et cetera. And the registrar can email back and say, well, I've set you up in room 235 and your spot is Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 8 a.m. You're probably not paying for that space. If you then email the registrar back and say, no, this is my high maintenance faculty member, he or she will only teach on Tuesday, Thursday at 11 o'clock and will only teach in the classroom next door to their office. And so I need classroom 367. That's first right of refusal and you're paying for it. And so what we want to do is we want deans to decide how much they'll pay for. And if they're willing to pay, then they should pay. And if not, we can optimize as a university much better to have the classroom space centralized. And so it's not going to be based on building or the name of the building or this and that and the other. It's going to be based on how much, what that trade-off conversation is and how much colleges want to pay for themselves and own versus how much they're willing to kind of roll the dice for slots.
Is the existing university space being still active, and how will it more closely be?
I just looked at Jessica. Ms. Space, and it's not. That's right, that's fine. Jessica.
Come on up, Jessica.
The space committee is not active at this. Okay.
So there's some places where the committees are active, and like the curriculum committee is an active committee. We've got it listed on here. We're simply asking them to amend their charge a little bit and think about financial components of curriculum or new programs. The master planning committee, of course, is an active existing committee. The Dean's Council, of course, is an active existing committee. So some of them we've simply tweaked their charge a little bit, but the new ones are really the EBC and the Support Unit Allocation Committee and the Space Committee.
During the implementation phase, the hiring is still on hold. So, I understand the hiring is still on hold. But there may be long-term impact of holding hiring currently. What thought has been given to maybe speeding up the hiring process during the implementation process? When I talk about speeding up the hiring process, I'm talking about approving, replacing positions that were created by the hiring.
No, so that's a really great question. So there have been some positions that have been approved for hiring, for recruitment, for tenure track positions. Those have been very few and far between, given the fact that we are confronting our fiscal challenges. We also are undergoing a comprehensive academic program evaluation process, so that by the end of the year, what we hope is that we identify programs that we need to be sure that we adequately support, and also programs that we need to grow. And so with that, we will be hiring people. And we can no longer just think that automatically if somebody retires, we need to hire somebody new, a replacement. It depends on the area and if there is a need. So we're just looking a little bit differently about that. So again, there have been several positions that have been approved for tenure track hires. Most of them have been temporary at this point. But at the end of the year, what we hope after the CAPE process is that we'll be better positioned to really identify areas that we need to support. Because we certainly do want to support areas where there's student demand and growth areas too.
We budgeted probably for a 3% enrollment decline, and we missed it by about 1%. So right now, we know we have the ability to use carry forward we're holding to fill a one-year gap in the budget. But that's one of the, we're waiting obviously to see what happens in the spring. We think there's some variables that will contribute to better spring numbers than would have been in the past, based on some of the enrollment decline in the fall were students that had characteristics that lended to not retaining them in the spring anyway. So we do have to factor into the next budget process student progression as well as what our entering class is going to look like. So today, do I know how to factor in if the fall shortfall is 1% and it's about $1 million? So we'll see what happens in the spring, and then obviously it's going to. The Executive Budget Committee has never existed before, has never built a budget. We've got to be patient in this process, as there's some learning curves that are going to happen. But things will get better once we have a stable or growing enrollment.
So I'll take that a little bit further just because there's not that many questions. But we kind of touched a little bit of this on the last meeting, last spoken forum, where we talked more about the details. But so in that kind of scenario, what would happen is, so the tuition revenues that are allocated to each college and school are based on the previous year's credit hour production. So in a scenario like this, we would allocate out, we would forecast the tuition revenue. We would proportionally divvy that up by college and school in their budget based on last year's credit hour. And so then this year, as we miss the number, all boats would kind of rise and fall together. And so if, say, that whole 1% miss was in one college, right, they wouldn't feel it differentially than the other colleges until the next year. And so within the year, everybody works together and goes up and down, but then for the next budget year, when we update that 1 year in arrears credit hour number, that's when the different colleges would see how the enrollments changes hit them. That didn't even spur questions. A friendly group today.
Christina from Word. I have a question about some of the functionality and feedback and outlet units. Some of this has to do with space. So we're essentially moving from an average of space to renters. And as a renter, it doesn't work. You call your landlord, you either get fixed or you get just another rent. So if we're in buildings that are less functional or older, A, are we getting stuff on our rent? And B, when the heat doesn't work, how do we adjust that or sort of figure it out?
So we anticipate that, and what we've seen in other institutions is that this type of a model creates much more responsiveness from those types of services. And so, you know, when you can look at your budget and say, my college is paying, you know, $1 million a year for space and facilities, you won't get over here and fix my heat, then, you know, that has an impact and they get over there. Now, what I'll say, and facilities is probably ready to come out of their seat and answer some of this question.
Too, I want to sort of stand up for facilities here, because when you're building a development, 71.
That's where I was about to go. So that's likely a deferred maintenance issue because we hadn't replaced the windows, we don't have the right insulation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so those kind of decisions about deferred maintenance would go through the space planning committee, the space committee, where we would prioritize our deferred maintenance needs and decide how much deferred maintenance we can fund every year. And so so we didn't want to differentially charge by square foot and say, okay, this is great space, it's $32, this is dumpy space, it's $22. And so for simplicity's sake, we're charging everybody the same. And from a deferred maintenance perspective, the assumption is your time will also come, and because it'll rotate through this committee that has a representation on it. Now, for service levels, right, light bulbs, you know, air conditioning filters, carpet, paint, stuff like that, we would anticipate that services will be more responsive. We don't want to get into discounting because it just gets so complicating in that kind of model.
Is that for the space committee? Is that?
Generally, that's the space committee. Now, what we've told the committee at WKU again is it should be a crawl, walk, run kind of model. And so as we start out, we need to focus on the cost per square foot and the trading of space, but you would generally see that committee weighing in on the deferred maintenance priorities as well.
In the business space again, thinking about labs. So for specified spaces that can be used for anything else, so chemistry lab or art lab or the music room, how can departments have to absorb the cost of those specific spaces?
So I don't have the list in front of me, but we did exclude some space, particularly some performing arts space where we didn't think it was fair for that college to pay for a big auditorium that really the entire university uses. And so there were some exceptions, like 5 or 6, I think, that the committee made. In other cases where it's simply, like a chemistry lab, it's just the business model that college is more expensive, and we recognize that, and we're not asking them to break even or turn a profit. We just want to know the true cost of space. And so there's been a handful of exceptions, but in general, it's business model as well.
Let me add a couple other comments. We talk about paying for space. You're not going to get an invoice. This is a one component in a model, an allocation model, to have full costs understood. But it's not as if a college or department is going to actually see an expense through the accounting system. The other thing is that if you look at the large spreadsheets down at the bottom, there's a line that says capital renewal, and there are no numbers. It was to send the message that this model has not addressed deferred maintenance and how much an institution, whether it's 2% or 3% of your investment in plant, that you ought to be plowing back into maintaining those facilities. That's a serious topic that the institution is going to have to address, but at this point, all we've done is put a placeholder in the model for it.
I'll probably get in trouble with facilities again, but our estimate of deferred maintenance or capital maintenance at an institution of this size should probably be $7 to $10 million a year, and we're spending like $750,000 a year, something like that. So that's an easy thing to cut. And so as budgets got tighter, it's easier to cut those than accounting professor salaries, right? And so we've gotten rid of those. And so as we build into a stronger financial position, we'll need to invest more in deferred maintenance, and that's the point Ann's making, where it's zeroed out at the bottom, but we want to start adding those numbers over time. I'll poke the bear.
This is my partner from the strategic planning. I'm a little unclear on how carry forward is used for, or let me talk more in terms of deficit of 1 year or surplus of 1 year. How will it be handled on a year-to-year basis?
I'd rather take that one.
Yeah.
Terry? No. That's a very serious topic, and honestly, we're still working through a policy. We're looking at a new policy that would address the ability to create reserves for colleges versus the amount that is in fact returned to a college. But at this point, we have to address the structural imbalance of the budget, which impacts the ability to return carry forward. As our budget right now is balanced by $8 million in carry forward. So till we have a fiscally stable budget, structurally balanced budget, then it's going to impact our ability to fully implement a carry forward policy that would be the right thing to do in a decentralized budget model.
And it's notable that the first time that will take hold is still 19 months away, right? Because we would go live with the model in about 7 months in July, or I guess it's 6 months now in July. And so to have the year-end carry forward would be another 12 months from then. So that's the target for finalizing the carry forward policy and as Ann said, in a decentralized model, you need incentives, though with a structural deficit, we've got to figure out how to get out of the hole we're in. And so we've got to work through some of those policy issues.
Probably the more serious policy issue long-term is why are we so dependent on the carry forward? And that's what we've got to address, because if you looked at carry forward as, oh, it'd be nice to replace some equipment, over the extra professional development, seed money, that would be great. But the real truth is that we're using those one-time funds to shore up a base and annual, normal annual costs.
Bill from English. One of the things I'm excited about this program is the data, which will become available. One of the challenges I have with the department is projecting enrollments, figuring out how many sections of courses and stuff like that. You don't do a very good job of that right now. I imagine there's other department heads that have information that help them do that planning phase that you were talking about. Is there going to be a venue? Is there already a plan for asking us what information is important to make that? Because I like the plan, but I don't always have the information.
So I would say we've got to get better with data, and we're working to get there. And so the first thing we want to be able to do is give you historical data and give you the model that allows for what-if scenarios, right? If it changed, ABC. Now, there's more nuanced data at the department and program level that this model doesn't quite get us to yet, but other teams are working on as part of the CAPE initiative, and ultimately those are going to come together and help us get to this more data-informed environment. So we want to start with historical data and forecast models and then move forward. In terms of doing more collection of feedback from stakeholders to ask for data. Again, we've met with a lot of stakeholders. We never want to cut that off, right? We want to keep doing that. So what I would recommend is have you reach out to one of us, or perhaps to Kim, or the website. The RAMP website has a link at the bottom for an email us. We cut it off here, but it's got an email us right here for those kind of things. And so we want to continue to meet with chairs and others, but if you have a specific thing in mind, please let us know. Yeah. The template will be posted on the website. It's not quite there yet, but the models are there and the template's coming.
Another question, when we make an interview with 4% viewers and 3% viewers, maybe we get 5% more than what we plan for. One of the things I noticed is having the emergency hire. We can often see the emergency coming 6 months away, but we could delay that process. I mean, are we going to have checks and balances to the right method or not? When are we going to be able to kind of push a button and say, we didn't quite put this right, we see this coming, we need to act now, or the problem is going to grow and be a bigger problem.
Well, so as IT will attest, we're not at the push a button yet. This is all in Microsoft Excel right now, and we've had discussions about ways that it can be automated and create better systems and tools from that perspective. But again, that costs money, and we're not in a position to make those investments, I think, at the moment. But I think that'll come eventually. I do want to make sure it's clear. Yeah, I do want to make sure it's clear the model from this perspective flows to the college and school level. And so you would still have those conversations with the deans. Now you would be armed with the data to be able to say, okay, my credit hours changed by X. And I know that credit hour, for every credit hour of instruction, my college gets $297. And so you can do the math and say, so we generated X amount more, right? So you'll be more informed in data-driven conversations, but those will still flow through the deans.
We have staff representatives from other communities. Is there a reason
David, you're asking about the Space Allocation Committee, right? Okay, yeah, well, that's a valid point. I think we started with the structure of the old committee, and this looks much like it did when it was fully functioning. So I don't see any reason why, if we wanted to have a staff council representative on that committee, that would be fine.
But it's notable.
Yeah.
The two comments I would make is we're of course trying to keep the committee small. Smaller committees are more effective. And then two, administrative units don't pay for space. Only academic units pay for space. And so this in many ways is meant to reflect the people that are paying and the people that are getting charged to make sure that their wishes are being considered. Only academics pay. Everybody gets space, but the cost of it's rolled in. So if you were to go to rent space across the street, it would cost you, $14 or $18 a square foot or something like that. The reason it costs $28 on campus is because we're only charging about half the campus. So we don't charge administrative units for space. And if there's common space, no, it's a free rider, right? So $28 is the inflated cost because of free riders. And so administrative units don't get charged. There's no step downs, right? HR doesn't pay IT doesn't pay facilities doesn't pay accountants. So.
Follow-up question, I understand you kind of outlined the significance of the staff and the planning process. We can also, as staff, use this place, whatever space we can move in, and be able to build an argument back. I think it would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Recommendation, and it's not all enough. Especially when it's presented to the regions, but I've noticed that it seems like here is important that
Yeah. We can take that back. I was simply trying to say the rationale for part of the thinking.
Hi, Cheryl Davis, Office of Region for Youth Activity in graduate school. My question is a different area entirely, but as you indicated, in this model, there is a considerable incentive for faculty and staff to apply for external funding. And the question I've been getting a lot, I don't know the answer to, if it's a non-academic unit, for instance, Office of Research, and there are grants associated with that unit, the way the model is designed, will the F&A associated with that grant go back to that unit? And similarly, the incentive that's built into the model, at least for colleges that have grants associated with college, is that incentive only intended for the academic units, or would that same incentive be provided for non-academic units?
So non-academic units can generate revenue. If you pull up the model, the column to the far right for administrative units is total budget, and then there's a revenue budget, and then a net budget, and the net budget's what's allocated out. So there is a form for units to generate revenue, whether it be research dollars or indirect dollars. The research incentive is only applied to colleges and schools, though, and so it's a pretty strong one for colleges and schools. And so for every dollar in the 2018 model, for every dollar of funded research that a college or school brings in, they get 85 cents of state appropriation. It's almost like an internally sponsored indirect cost recovery.
All of the indirects,
all the indirects follow the units. There's no, so when we think about the revenue streams, there's revenue streams that are just directly allocated to the units that generate them, and then there's other places where there's interventions and allocations, and there's no intervention or allocation to the indirect cost recovery. It just goes where collected, and there's no policy where it's scraped off by the VPR or anything like that.
I'm Karen Lindsay.
That's correct. What should the reward, I mean, yeah, so I guess that's how normal, yeah.
Unit-wise, I'm not under what a college or a school. And yet if I gain a grant that benefits university-wide, it seems that there's no incentive for me to seek that help.
So, I mean, when you boil a lot of this down, the academic units, we're trying to incentivize for research and instruction and revenue growth so that we can maximize our mission. And the administrative units, we want to incentivize to provide the best services we can to the other units and to the colleges and schools. And so the theory is that we don't want our administrative units focused on grant writing and proposal writing and that. We want our administrative units supporting our colleges and schools and our students and our faculty and things. And so that's the logic. We could debate whether that logic is good or bad, but I think that's where the committee fell out.
Okay, I think I get it. A second question, if I may. You had indicated right at the start a one-page overview of the income, the revenues, the expenditures. Will we be able to dig into that a little further so that any questions that we come up with, maybe we can investigate them ourselves?
Yeah. So again, I think there's been a commitment to transparency, and we would welcome, I think, those questions to be sent to us. As you might imagine, we anticipate there's going to be a big surge of questions, and it's going to take us a little bit of time to get through that. And our budget office is actually down one team member right now and potentially going down another team member. So it's going to be hard to get through those, but we want to commit to that transparency, and we would encourage people to submit those kind of requests. There's pretty good detail right now.
On one page.
Yeah, it's a big page. We printed out on 11 by 17 for our steering committee members.
Very briefly, this time I'm asking a question from Director Bowman, as the Director of Public Affairs. We realize about $1.1 million in federal grants each year that we have to reapply for and maintain. We are currently working with those who bring an additional $400,000 for the project in the upcoming 3-year period. So my understanding based on, this is just for clarity,
Yep.
is that there's no incentive for us to benefit the university with those grants.
There is there's an altruistic incentive. There is an incentive because it will allow you to do more within your unit and provide more value, but there is no financial incentive. We do not.
So I employ 37 undergraduate students. 8 people, 37. I dedicate almost $200,000 of my annual budget, plus that special money,
Yep.
toward their pay. We contribute and supplement the school journalism and broadcasting in the way that we educate students and do liberally in a applied research atmosphere.
Sure.
I don't understand why hearing this, that there's not consideration given to staff units or non-academic units that provide the same role, and especially those like mine that generate almost 5% of all grant in this
Yeah.
university.
I mean, so don't get me wrong. I think that's a terrific contribution that you're making. But compared, I'm not saying it doesn't add value. It sounds like it. No, I'm saying there's not a financial incentive. We're not trying to juice the system and give you extra dollars. But
Without it having, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It doesn't have that value. Does that mean the direct support we receive from the university won't have any consideration for that? In other words, we receive direct university support as well, and indirect support.
Yeah.
Is that at risk, even though we do generate, over $1 million in grants?
yeah. So we're not looking at the reasonableness or validity of anybody's budget. So this doesn't necessarily put anybody's budget at risk. What I would say is if I could compare and contrast you getting a $400,000 grant with engineering getting a $400,000 grant. I think it's a terrific, in any of those cases, it's great for assuming that the grant is strategic, right? Not all grants are strategic, and some grants you want to say no to. But if it's a strategic grant and it fits our mission and strategic plan, that's terrific. Okay, now you get the $400,000 in revenue from the federal government. You spend $400,000 enhancing your mission, your outreach, your activities, whatever it is you're doing. If engineering gets that same $400,000 in grants, they bring in that, we then turn around and we charge them for the space that they're in. We're not charging you. We charge them for HR. We're not charging you. We charge them for IT support. We're not charging you. And so what we need to do is make sure that from a research perspective, engineering still wants to go out and get the 400 grand. And so we give them an extra 85 cents on the dollar that helps them cover their space and their overhead and all those kind of things that aren't otherwise covered. And all the administrative and service units are effectively getting a free ride on all of those costs because we don't attribute allocated costs to the administrative units. And so this, yeah.
That means that any of the money that I pay to IT or any other cost associated with on this campus won't come out of my budget in the future, correct? Because I have costs now.
That is not correct. So what they're...
It's not a free ride, right? If I have to supplement IT, then I do it. I still don't get it.
Yeah. So there are two types of dollars that go to administrative units. So some are recharges that are for specific services, and we are not getting, there's some recharges we'll probably do away with, like we're talking about the telephone recharge, getting rid of that. But there's other recharges that we're not going to get rid of. Now, the cost of IT and facilities, et cetera, that's allocated to the academic units is net of all those recharges. So for example, we set facilities budgets, they take out the recharges facilities generates, and then we allocate the net out to only the academic units. And so the administrative units don't pay the full cost. They don't pay that net cost, they only pay for a recharge.
So when I get the $400,000 grant and the 42% that comes out of it for OSP, where does that come from? Do I get to keep that 42% or does it still come out and go to the university?
I don't know what the 42% is. Yeah, so the indirects, remember that is the allocation that is not there's no intervention, there's no allocation. Those dollars go to the units that generate them. So for the college, for example, if engineering got a $100,000 grant and it had a 42% indirect cost recovery rate, they get their 100 grand, they get the 42,000, and they get 85,000. And they'd be able to use that to support other activities, to do seed research, to do travel, graduate assistance, research assistance, whatever it may be.
This is probably a combination of some of these. I know there was new information you all were grasping with and can you tell me how will the revenue that's generated by certain administrative support units be handled? Will they be able to keep portions of that, or is that going to go back to central and they are just allocated what they have been approved through the various committee processes?
There's so many different administrative units, it's hard to generalize. I'll say that the only administrative unit that's subject to an algorithm for revenue is DLO. And depending on how you count DLO, some of you may consider them administrative, some of you not. We have set them up like a college, and they get 20% of their revenue generation, and the colleges and schools that are delivering those programs get the other 80%. For all other administrative units, the revenue goes to the unit, and so you would have a budget, a revenue, and a net budget, and the net budget is what's allocated out, okay? Now, that's subject to discussion with that cost allocation committee, right? So there's no rules of the road for that, right? But the cost allocation committee may say, well, you're generating revenue, why do you need all this? Or, you know, you're generate more revenue, or don't generate revenue, do this other thing, right? But we want to facilitate those kind of conversations about what are the services that are valued from all of those units. And so that revenue piece, I can't stand here and make a promise that you will get it, because the committee is going to have that discussion with everyone, right? But the model, the funds flows, the rules, the parameters of the model are that those revenues flow to the units, period. Now, the committee is going to weigh in on what your net budget should be, which is going to reflect your revenues. Does that make sense? That goes back, a moment ago, the gentleman in front of the microphone, I think from Public Affairs, asked, will I get to keep that 40, or you asked, is my budget at risk, right? And I said we hadn't reviewed the validity or reasonableness or any of that stuff, right? So I couldn't say whether the budget was at risk. The committee is the one that's going to weigh in on the reasonableness and validity and appropriateness of the budget, right? And so the goal would be convincing that committee that your budget shouldn't be at risk. There's no parameter or the model that would suggest it goes away. It's just the governance and the process.
Hi, my name's Jessica. I wanted your comment that you made a statement that they only have activities, but according to the budget line out here on the website, it actually allocated across the model
Yeah, I apologize. It's allocated to the revenue unit. So the model, if you pull it up across the top, is all the academic units, and then there's kind of out to the side are the auxiliary units. So all the revenue generating units pay for space. The administrative and service units do not. So, parking, transportation, bookstore, athletics, et cetera, pay for space as well as the academic units. Now, they don't pay for all services because it's like some costs are allocated based on credit hour. Right? The WKU store doesn't have any credit hours, athletics doesn't have any credit hours, but space is allocated to everybody, or all revenue units.
Just a little question on DELO. What you just said sort of implies that the current situation with DELO allocations is anticipated to continue.
There are lots of different funds flows and current situations with DELO right now. They're not all treated the same. It's whether it's a cohort program or a summer program or continuing ed program, et cetera. What we're doing is we're shifting all of that to the same model, which is 20%, and we did model the 20% off some of the existing agreements. And so the historical agreements that were 20% effectively don't change, but for the 80% that goes to the colleges and schools, the cost of that instructional activity is going to the colleges and schools as well. Historically, DELO had covered some of that instructional cost. So it's a bit far to say it's staying the same, but not all DELO programs will change. It just depends on the structure of the DELO program, and there's so many different structures. Some are changing, some are not.
This is DELO is one component that will take a little longer to implement. Where Andrew uses an example of summer school, if summer school is considered part of DELO and it gets distributed 80%, 20% on the revenue, we have to have a mechanism to make sure that the faculty expenses for summer school that may now be charged to a DELO budget also follow the revenue on the expenditure side. So I know that's one topic that the academic affairs budget staff is looking at to see how are we going to phase in this portion of the model.
Three more minutes. I thought we were going to be done like 30 minutes ago, and then we got a big spurt of questions there. Well, if there's nothing else, I know we have a number of steering committee members in the room. They've worked extremely hard over the last 11 months, and I appreciate all of their commitments and efforts. Same with a number of folks from the provost office, the budget office, et cetera. There's still a lot more to come. Again, there's 7 more months before we go live with this. And again, we welcome continued feedback and questions and would refer you to the website.
I just wanted to say too that I think that, again, I'm still a newcomer here. And when you go from centralized budgeting to completely decentralized, incentivized budgeting, it's quite a change. But it's like going from darkness to really bright light. And so I think it'll take us a little while to work all this out. There are a lot of questions that we all have, but I think we'll be so much better for it because we'll be much better informed. We'll make even better decisions than we do now. And I think it will be really for the good. And again, it's better to be better informed and have almost too much information to go forward and to be even stronger for it.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.